So I thought we might close by, I have a question for you about your derivation of these moral virtues specifically from the Enlightenment. And I'm curious about that because, well, first of all, you could make a case that it wasn't so much the Enlightenment as it was specifically the rise of empirical science. And then you could, of course, have a discussion about how those two things are related. But I'm also curious, I've been reading Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, and McGilchrist makes a pretty strong case, I would say, that yet the rationalistic Enlightenment values are in some sense a consequence of the articulation of an underlying set of principles that are more metaphoric in nature, more narrative in nature. It's a case I also made in my book, Maps of Meaning, and to some degree in 12 Rules for Life, that the Enlightenment project and its rationality is nested inside a deeper web of metaphor and ritual and image that would be associated with longer scale cognitive processes, some of which are expressed in religious thinking, but some of which are grounded in not so much rationality as in motivation and emotion. And I mean, the way your book is structured, and I think the way Enlightenment thinkers think, is that there was a miracle of sorts that occurred sometime in the last 300 to 500 years, and people woke up and became rational. And then the question is, to what degree was the ground for that awakening prepared by events that weren't the awakening itself, but that were associated with other processes? And I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so there's nothing new under the sun, and a good intellectual historian can find the antecedents of any intellectual movement in various precursors. It's hard to, I don't think there's a lot in the Enlightenment that can specifically be attributed to religion, particularly Christianity, just based on the fact that it was already around for 1,000 years and nothing much happened. So it couldn't be religion itself or Christianity itself, although there are, as you say, there are strands that were carried over. In particular, and this is an insight that I got from my other half, Rebecca Goldstein, my wife, who you've appeared on stage with.
Right, yes.
To point out that one thing that the Greeks didn't have that Christianity did was the idea of compassion for the weak and universal human flourishing. You don't really have that for all of the brilliance of ancient Greece. That wasn't a big theme. But the Enlightenment, of course, did not spring out of nowhere. If I were to identify the antecedents, what happened prior to the 18th century that allowed it to unfold then, as opposed to a couple of hundred years earlier or a couple of hundred years later? One of them was the scientific revolution, conventionally located in the 17th century, which not only provided a kind of a paradigm for understanding, namely testing propositions against the empirical world and seeking deeper naturalistic explanations for phenomena, and which of course overturned millennia-old dogmas, reminding people that their own common sense, their own society's convictions were fallible. So that was an essential precursor. Another one was the discovery of the New World, that there were entire civilizations, entire literally worlds in their sense that had been unknown, and that the knowledge base that had been part of Western civilization for millennia was radically incomplete. And technologically, I suspect that the greater exchange of ideas and people was a contributor. That just prior to the Enlightenment, the second half of the 18th century, there was a massive growth in the efficiency of printing,
Right.
The printing press itself, but it was the democratization of books and pamphlets, the rise in literacy, and the movement of people. It became easier for heretics and radicals to jump ship and move to where things were cooler if things got too uncomfortable where they were. And it's amazing how many of the Enlightenment thinkers were persecuted for their beliefs. They were threatened with imprisonment or death. Many of them ended up in Holland or Paris or London, or jumped around to wherever they had the greatest freedom. But also just the sheer a kind of precursor of the web today, the fact that a pamphlet could be introduced, and within a few months it would be translated into a dozen European languages, and
Right.
and smuggled in. So the exchange of ideas, I think, helped to accelerate the Enlightenment. Although since it only happened once in human history, we can never really know for sure why it happened when it did. But those are three good guesses.
Well, and we're in an interesting time now where we can sit and make a video like this and publish it almost instantaneously and share it with 500,000 people. I mean, that ability to share ideas rapidly is developing apace, and God only knows what the consequence of that is. We're in a situation now, which has only occurred to me about last year, where the spoken word for the first time in human history has the same reach and longevity as the written word. And it's easier for people to listen. You know, audiobooks are becoming very popular. Lots and lots of people listen to podcasts. You know, I have working class people come to my talks all the time and say, look, I'm sitting in my forklift for 3 hours a day and I'm doing nothing but listening to podcasts, you know. So that's a really remarkable thing. So I think I'm going to let you go. You've been very generous with your time. I appreciate the conversation very much. I'm going to close by showing your book again, Steven Pinker's new book, Enlightenment Now, which is tearing up the bestseller charts and which is a guide to proper and intelligent optimism in the 21st century. And maybe I'd ask you just in closing, what do you think there are things that what do you think individuals should be particularly optimistic about right now? And what do you think individuals could do to spread the message that things are getting better and that we can solve our problems?
Yeah, the fact that there are new efforts to transcend political divisions and find out what works, to depoliticize and rationalize problems like poverty, like climate change, like war and peace, like crime. Those are very much worth supporting. That there are organizations like Apolitical, there are NGOs that try to monitor the state of the world. There's effective altruism. There's just the general application of rationality to solve our problems that is responsible for the progress that we've enjoyed in the past. And if there's going to be progress ahead of us, we'll be responsible for what we'll enjoy in the future.
All right. Well, would like to close too by mentioning to everyone who's listening that, you know, things are getting better. They're getting better because people are facing problems and actually trying to solve them. They're doing microanalysis of the problems, breaking them down into their constituent elements, being humble enough to use incremental solutions to solve them and to address them at a high level of resolution instead of a low level of, or a low resolution level of ideological debate. And it's really working. And I would, what would we say? Encourage people to pick up Dr. Pinker's book, because the world is getting better and we should know it and we should be happy about it and we should continue to foster that development in every way that we can. And I think this book is an excellent contribution to that effort, as well as your other books like the better angels of our nature. So thank you very much for spending the time with me today and for talking with me. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Jordan. The pleasure was mine.